In this video, I'm going to introduce the thread class. And in the past videos, we did everything on one thread, and that was the main thread. Instructions were executed line by line. But now we're going to change that by introducing the thread class and making our program multi-threaded. So multi-threading is a Java feature that allows concurrent execution of two or more parts of a code. So two things can be running at once. And there's two ways of doing this. Two ways of making a thread. We can extend the thread class, or we can implement the runnable interface. So I'm going to extend the thread class. Let's go over here to my project. I have basic threads, project 24, basic threads, one package, one class, and in that class there's a main method. All right, so we are going to make another class. Go to your package, right click, new, class, call this my thread. All right, then we hit finish. There we go. Now let's extend our thread class. So we're going to do extends thread. All right, so now we extended our thread class. Everything in a thread, everything of interest to us is going to happen in the run method. So we're going to override run. So we say override public void run. All right, and we don't call this directly. I will call it directly just to show you what happens. When we start the thread class is going to run this for us. All right, so we don't have to worry about calling it directly. Don't call it directly. Call start. I'll show you. Don't worry about that. So let's do a loop. Let's say for int I equals 0, I less than, go to 10, I plus plus. Let's print out some information so we see what's going on. We're going to use this thread current thread method to find out the current thread that's executing, which will be this one most of the time, except for when I call that run directly. That's the little trick here. I'm going to get the name so you can see what the name of the thread is being executed. If you don't name your thread, you'll get a default name. It'll be like thread 0, thread 1, thread 2. You can name your threads, and I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you one way of doing that. Let's do our loop. Let's do this. We'll go thread, and then I'll do a loop counter. A loop count. Yeah. And that'll be I. Let's put a little pause, a little delay in our loop. Let's go thread. So thread also has something called the sleep method. And we can just give it in milliseconds, so it's going to be a tenth of a second, 100 milliseconds. It's complaining we need to surround this in a try catch. And we could get a possible interrupt exception. That's why it makes you do that. Nice. So now we have a little thread here. We can call this. Let's go ahead and do that. And we'll go here. We'll say my thread. And I'll call it T1 new my thread. And T1 start. All right, and print out when we're exiting the program. Exiting program. So if we're using one thread, just the main thread, everything has to complete. This line must complete, then this line must complete, etc. until we get down to here. But because we are going to start this thread, it's going to start running independently. This is not going to be the last line that executes. Let's try that. There we go. If you notice, it was actually the first line that executed because it takes a little bit of time to start the thread. So we didn't have to wait for it. It could do something else. So that's what's really good about threads. Like if you're going to read in a big data set or a whole bunch of files or something, you don't have to wait on it. And that's really important if you actually want to cancel it, because you need one thread to cancel the other thread. You can't just cancel it if it's all one main thread. You'd have to just close your program or stop running your program. Let's add something to our threads just to get a little more familiar with this. Let's go to a thread class, my thread, and do a member variable. Say int delay, loop delay. Let's make a constructor. Right click. We'll go source. Constructor using fields. Generate. All right. Now, another thing we can do is name our thread. That would be a good thing to do. And I'm just going to pass it in the constructor. So you can do, you can actually do a, see the set name, you can do a get name too, but what's easier is just to pass the name in to the super, so the constructor for this thread class will name it if you pass the name in here. And let's see, loop delay is complaining it's not being used. Okay, that makes sense. Let's go down here, and where's our loop delay? There we go. All right, let's save everything. And this is complaining because we need to put a name in here. So I'm going to call this the Pete thread. And I'll give it a delay of 100 milliseconds because I'm going to make another thread. It's going to go a little bit at a little bit of a different rate of speed. Make this T2. Make this Theo. And 150 millisecond delay. Right, and then T2 start. All right, let's run it. Go here. There we go. So you can see that things are running independently. We have this loop firing away. They're going every other until the Pete starts speeding up a little bit, right? And then at the end, Theo had to catch up. All right, so I mentioned that you can't call the run method. You shouldn't call the run method directly. Let's go ahead and try it. Let's make sure everything is finished though before we do it. So we'll sleep this main thread just a little bit, say 2 seconds, 2,000 milliseconds, just to make sure these complete before we do something with the thread again. Let's add the throws declaration. It'll just throw it right here. Let's go T2 run. All right. And remember, our two threads are Pete and Theo. Run. And we're pausing. Oh, look at that. The main thread. So when you run a thread like that, it's the main thread that's actually running. So you're losing your benefit of having a thread. That's why you want to use start. But since I already started this thread, I can't start it again. You got to know that. You can't restart a thread. And the downside of that whole not restarting threads, it doesn't give you a compile error. So you have to be careful. This is a runtime error. So you can go ahead and think everything's fine. You run your code, boom, illegal thread state exception. So you have to reinstantiate your thread. You have to do something like this. So you're actually not using the same thread. You're just using the same variable. And we'll do thread. And we can still call it Theo. That's fine. And we'll just call it we'll make it 75 milliseconds. Now everything will be all right because we got a new thread, right? This is going to be a whole new reference to this thread. T2 is just a variable that's being reused. There we go. Theo just ran again, but he didn't really run again. We made a whole new one. All right, so that's pretty good. In the next video, I am going to I'm going to use threads I'm going to make threads by implementing the runnable interface. So that's the second way we use threads in Java. We create threads in Java. We can do it by extending the thread class or implementing the runnable interface.